Ananth Krishnan, from what I can understand, from what all our reporters are saying, from what we just heard from Rakesh Sharma, he's been our GOC on the ground, understands the lay of the land. This is very clearly a tit for tat, quid pro quo. You came in on the North Bank, we've gone in on the South Bank. Now either the Chinese can pull back, reverse positions, India pulls back, China pulls back, but they didn't just come in with all these forces, all these men, machine and equipment to turn around and go back home. That could be disastrous for Xi Jinping. What's your reading of the state of play inside mainland China at this moment, Ananth?
I think, Rahul, looking at the 5 statements you mentioned, which came in the span of 24 hours, which is really unprecedented, they all said the same thing, which was that China publicly demanded India to immediately withdraw. And the fact that these statements have been covered widely in the Chinese press as well. I think taking a step back, looking at what they've done starting from late April, early May, from Depsang to Galwan Valley to Gogra Hot Springs to North Bank and now to the South Bank, which is what India tried to preempt. I think it's really clear that the message from the Central Military Commission, from Xi Jinping, is to the PLA to hold its ground along the LAC, to perhaps even try and redraw the LAC and align it with their perceptions in multiple areas in this sector. And I think that it's very clear that this is coming from the top. Otherwise, this would not have carried on for so long, over so many months, which is why it leaves me concerned as to where exactly these talks are going if, at the end of the day, their demand is what it was at early May, which is that this is our line and you have to abide by it. So that leaves me quite concerned, especially because, as you mentioned at the start of this program, while talks were happening even on August 31st, on Monday, that they were trying to carry out actions on the ground, which makes it very clear that I think the Chinese side sees limited utility in these talks, perhaps only in giving them time to strengthen their position on the ground and thereby strengthening their bargaining position going into talks. So that seems to be their game as far as talks are concerned. And what leaves me particularly worried is the opening up of a new front that we saw this weekend. And so far, we've only been in the Western sector. Can we say with certainty that new fronts aren't going to be opened in the middle sector and the eastern sector? Those are very worrying questions, Rahul.
Sushant Sareen, how are you reading the current situation? Are we headed towards a dangerous military escalation, which will be bloody and brutal for both sides? Or do you believe that, now that we've gone in and taken land that the Chinese are completely furious about, there can be a quid pro quo, a bargain and a pullback on both sides?
Rahul, it's difficult to say how this is going to play out. Look, a couple of things are very clear. One, I think we are already in an escalation spiral. The preemptive action that India took to fortify the area which we maintain is part on our side of the LAC, regardless of what the Chinese say, means that, the disputed sections of the LAC are now quite out and open. The second thing which comes to mind is that for the last 3 or 4 months, we have been insisting that the only solution to this is status quo ante. But now is any kind of status quo ante going back to that possible anymore? I don't think so, because obviously the kind of distrust which has come in, this is not the earlier kind of minor intrusions which used to take place. People would come, camp for 2 days and return. This is a completely qualitative and quantitative change in the situation on the ground. Which means that the Chinese have shown no signs of going back, to status quo ante. And if tomorrow there is, you still give negotiations a chance, then the only way you go back to status quo ante is that you go to, you have some kind of a deal on where exactly the LAC is run, which is hardly easy thing to do, considering also that the Chinese have resisted defining the LAC for decades now. And despite Mr. Modi's insistence and his keenness that this matter be sorted out, the Chinese have been resisting it. So clearly now you are in a very, very different situation. Will cooler heads prevail? Will it just be more jostling without any firing, more jostling for territory, capturing or fortifying your positions to the extent you can? Or will that lead to some kind of a shooting match? And I completely agree with my other colleagues on your panel that in case there is a shooting match, then I would be extremely doubtful if it will remain a very, very limited kind of a thing. I think then everything is up, in the air. And then you are looking at a wider conflict. I don't see how it will stop because somebody lost his head and fired a couple of shots, and that's where it will all end. So yes, we are in a kind of a hair trigger situation.
Andrew Lewis, what Xi Jinping has done has brought 2.7 billion people on the verge of conflict. Now just imagine for a moment, you've got the Indian army on a mountaintop, the Chinese army coming up. They're blaring from their microphones, putting on torchlights, sending them back, saying you've been spotted. You know, one hothead opening one round can then lead to a calamitous situation. You know, what in the world is Xi Jinping thinking? And you've really landed yourself at a time when China thought that it's emerging as a new global power. You've locked yourself in a conflict where there's absolutely no question of China being able to win.
Well, that's why the protocol of not using any bullets has been maintained for decades, for over 50 years. Because, as you said, once a shot is fired, there is no telling that it would be, it's almost certain, really, that it's going to escalate. I mean, you talk about tanks, you're talking about anti-tank weapons, but don't forget there is aircraft as well, and there are missiles as well. And then both countries are nuclear armed. So I think that there is a no-brainer to prevent this kind of catastrophic escalation, because both countries are not likely to win. So it is quite astounding that this kind of escalations are allowed to happen. And I've heard about preemptive action. I've heard about occupying heights. But of course, both sides can do the same. And it would be very dangerous. At the end of the day, the line of actual control are still in dispute. So I think that both sides are, in fact, the Chinese, Beijing, the foreign minister, I think Wang Yi, right from the start is calling for de-escalation. Because at the end of the day, the talk must be maintained at a very high level, even if there is no immediate solution to define the line of actual control, at least that there is a protocol to de-escalate or to prevent escalation. Especially now with over the past couple of months, accumulation of military assets on both sides. So I think that just occupying a certain height, marshalling tanks and anti-tanks, is not the solution. It's in fact the problem. So I think that the beating one's chest on either side is not going to solve the problem.
Okay.